Welcome everyone to our webinar. This is our first virtual webinar that we've done so far. So tonight, Robert will be talking about building your support team and getting the most out of your competition horse. So I'll just introduce myself. My name's Helen. I'm one of the vets. I'm fairly new to the practice, so some of you may have met me, others may not have yet. And Robert, most of you will probably have met him already. He is one of our senior vets. He also does some Team GB work, which he'll talk a little bit about during the talk. We encourage you to ask as many questions as you'd like. So if you have any questions, do feel free to pop them in the Q&A. They'll either be answered as we go. I'll just stop and ask Robert, or alternatively at the end. And yep, I hopefully won't miss anything. So on that note, I shall pass over to Robert.
Great, thank you very much. Yes, so I'll share my screen in a minute and we'll go through, but I just wanted to say hello to everybody first before we get started. My name's Robert, obviously. I've been with Scott Duns for a few years now, and I just want to talk to you a bit about what it is being a team vet, and then a bit about how to build your own support network at home. I'm sure people all already have all of these people in place, but it's just about how to get the most out of everybody and looking for those extra margins here and there where you can, and what all that entails. So let me share my screen. Great. So yeah, building your support team and getting the most from your horse, from your competition horse. So a little bit about me first to start. So hence the funny accent, I'm from Canada. I graduated from the Atlantic Vet College in 2002. I've worked a couple of years in the States in Kentucky and a couple of years in Canada, but moved permanently to the UK in 2007. So I've been here, spent a little time before that as well. How did I get to this point? Well, had a dressage horse myself that I did a little bit of playing around with, more than competing and stuff, really. Very lucky to have a very nice horse, and he's since gone on to a new rider and has moved up through the ranks and is currently in Grand Prix, which is great to watch him going on and doing well. That sort of led my interest into more dressage, and in 2011 I became a veterinary delegate in dressage for the FEI, and what that means is that I could officiate at FEI competitions as a veterinarian. In 2018 I joined Scott Duns Equine Clinic as senior veterinarian there, and I'll tell you a little bit more about our practice in a moment. Through working with dressage, started doing more with the local dressage in our area with British Dressage. And in 2014, I joined the under 21s team, first as pony team vet, and then taking over all the youth teams a couple of years later. In 2017, then I joined working with the British Equestrian Federation and working through our world class program. We have various levels leading up to senior teams or Olympic selectable teams. And I was working with the para dressage and eventing teams. And then last year I became the senior vet for the British para-equestrian dressage podium team as well. And so we'll be heading to Tokyo later this summer, which I'm very excited about. So Scott Duns Equine Clinic, we're based in Wokingham in Berkshire, but we serve a lot of the kind of southeast area. And I live in Tame myself, so I'm in Oxfordshire, so we kind of cover quite a large area. We have 6 full-time veterinarians solely in equine, and plus one other Sarah through Equicall that we have as a dedicated, as part of our emergency team as well. We have a 13-box facilities, 13-box stable yard, surgery facilities, examination rooms, kind of full service clinic with many visiting specialists in different areas. So we have, as Scott Duns Equine, we're part of CVS Equine. And what CVS Equine is a larger group of, I think there's 14 different equine clinics within the UK, Ireland, and Holland as well. And so through that cooperation with all these larger hospitals, we're able to access a lot of really top specialists from around the UK that we have coming in, doing surgeries, doing clinics, and different specialty procedures for us, which we're very lucky to have, and really helps us and our clients on a day-to-day basis, that we can get all this specialty care and access to specialists very easily, which is great. So I thought I'd talk slightly first, or just a little bit of a mention to start with, about what exactly it is to be a team vet and what do we actually do. I think that a lot of people think, well, of course, you work with horses and your team vet, you go along just in case there's any emergencies or anything like that. And of course, that can be part of it, that we need to look after, obviously, horses when we're traveling with equestrian teams to championship events mainly, or nations cups, things like that. But there's a much bigger backstory before you ever get to the competition phase, with as being part of a team vet and being part of the bigger group working with the equestrian athletes in the sport. So we're very lucky in the UK that we've got a very strong support team: farriers, physiotherapists, other physical therapists, veterinaries, positional analysis, all kinds, saddlers, all kinds, all inputting on horses that are on programs. And what we're looking at is we see these horses at regular intervals through the year, and it's all about benchmarking where that horse is, how they are moving on through their trajectory of their targets and their goals, in any way that journey for that athlete or that horse can be supported. So that might be in small differences in management, in slight changes in shoeing or small veterinary interventions, consulting on different aspects of their home management just in general, like from anything from stabling, air conditioning, air condition, feeding, all different aspects of equine health, really. And so the actual, when you're at the competition or traveling to a competition, that's a very small part of the process. And actually, we hope we've ticked all these boxes many, many months before we ever get to there. And we don't have many emergency or things to worry about by the time we're at that problem, or by the time we're at that stage. And I felt like working through this environment with teams, that there's actually a bigger message that you can really carry on to everybody's journey with their horse, whether you're looking at qualifying for winter regionals or whatever your aspirations might be, the local riding club championships, whatever that is. There's a lot that people can take forward and incorporate in their own programs at home. Bear with me a minute. So other aspects. So when we actually are at championships and traveling with teams, that is a very enjoyable part of the trip, obviously, but it's actually a lot of work as well, and a lot of very early mornings and very late nights, a lot of time spent in the stable, and a lot of time spent driving as well. But when you're away traveling with horses, aside from, if we would go generally, especially particularly with the youth teams, I would travel with the horses to get them to a location, and then as well as the grooms, and then the athletes would join us at the destination. That's typically how most of it works. That way we can ensure the horses travel well, get to the competitions in their peak fitness or peak ability, and obviously kind of manage them along the way. Also observing any training, looking for any areas of problems coming in before we get to a stage where it's a problem, and trying to make sure the horses have enough energy and condition to get them through intense travel as well as a intense competition. So what I'd like to kind of think about as the team approach is that you're having a very proactive approach to your management of your horse versus having a reactive management approach. And I think I know really for a lot of people, and it's quite natural that we do this way, is that we do tend to be reactive, that we think, well, we've got a good vet that we use, and we've got a good farrier we use, and the farrier knows his job, and he does a great job shoeing my horse, and I've got a physiotherapist, and she comes regularly, and she does a great job at looking after my horse. But we call these people mostly when we have a problem, or more from the physio or from the vet or saddler. When we perceive there's a problem, then we'll get in touch and phone them, rather than benchmarking, monitoring throughout the process, reassessing where you're at, and having a proactive approach. The other thing I find time and time again, aside from people who are just being reactive, is that they're not always putting two things together. So they may think the farrier does a great job, but they fail to input to the farrier issues they might be feeling in the ridden work. And although the farrier might be doing a great job, there might be more that can be done, or things that could be tweaked or changed slightly if the farrier had access to the information that the rider can provide through the feel of what they're feeling when they're on the horse, or the areas they're finding difficult. Also, as the athlete or rider, you want to promote these connections between all of these people helping you, and report to the vet what the physio found, report to the farrier what the vet was saying, and promote these connections through people, and get them in contact. And ideally, in a perfect world, get them together from time to time, and kind of organize that you can have multiple people on the yard at the same time, looking at the same thing. And then you have people working from the same page and cooperation to help benefit your horse more. And you can find that actually once you get people putting their heads together, that you can see greater gains being made. So we use the term within our sport a lot about marginal gains. So what are we on about with marginal gains? It's all those little changes that we can, I'll get back there. All those little changes that we can make that add up to big difference. And if we use dressage, for example, all those little half marks that you can pick up on a test make quite a difference to your score at the end. Particularly when we're talking about elite sport and Olympic Games or championships, there's often very few marks between a gold medal and a silver medal, or a bronze medal and no medal at all. So looking for all those small advantages along the way can really have a massive impact on your outcome. And so even if we look at tiny things in this kind of perspective, I'll use a veterinary example, but you may not have a horse that of course is not unsound in any way, but if it's starting to feel its joints a little bit and it's just lacking some activity, you're not going to get as good a marks. If it's a little uneven one way or the other because there's some soft tissue tightness or a little bit of pain coming from somewhere, or just that it's not 100% one side or another, you're going to have unevenness, which is going to lead to unequal marks. All these little things start to creep in. So typically, our home support team, kind of made up of these sort of big areas, was farrier, trainer, therapist, saddler. That was kind of in the middle, coordinating often with one or the other at a different time. And that's a lot of the program people have. And then they call in bits and pieces or put different people in communication here and there periodically if there was an issue. But I'll show you on the next slide what we'd kind of like to work more towards, and include more input of people. So thinking about the farrier, main thing we want to think about, and I'd kind of loosely term these as our kind of 5 pillars to success, if you will. So the farrier is going to provide us with a strong base of support. The vet's going to help make sure we don't have any mechanical issues or areas of discomfort. So then the mechanics, if we have a strong, stable base of support to start out with, that'll improve how the mechanics work up through the limb and the rest of the body. Therapist helps support our soft tissue through its development as we're building strength, and aid us in ways we can manage that. Trainer rider reporting back and feeling, and then letting everybody know what they're seeing from the ground. How is the horse's way of going? What could be better? And most importantly, what does it feel like as the rider? Because there's so many issues with horses, and so much of that marginal areas we can improve on isn't always stuff we can see from the ground, but what the athlete can feel. And you can notice this as a rider if you start to pay attention and tune in and question those things. And I see a lot of the cases I see fall into that category where, you know, there doesn't seem to be an overt problem with the horse, but the rider feels something has changed, something's just not going as it should. What we'd like to have, what we're aiming for, is actually, this is really a truer picture of the scenario that will help a horse, because what everybody does has such an impact on the rest of the team. And unless we have people communicating and talking through the issues everybody's having, we're not really going to always get to the bottom of the problem quick enough, or efficient, you know, have as big of an impact on the problem as we could have. And I see time and time again where I'll go see a horse and I'll be told, well, I had the saddler out, he couldn't find anything, or I had the saddler out and he said, yes, it needs reflocking, and so it's been reflocked, and then kind of thought that's problem solved. Or I've had the physio out, yes, it was sore in the back, problem solved. Farrier, we pulled a shoe, he's got the shoes under a bit further, they were a bit underrun, problem solved. And they're not always connecting how these things are all related. So we want to be critical about how your horse is moving, what does it find difficult, and report that back to all these people if they're going to impact a change. I try often to have these conversations with people when I see them, and I do often still get that, oh no, he's fine. No, he's I don't have any real issues in the work so much. And then when you speak to the trainer, they say, oh, well, this half pass left is shocking. Or, you know, if they put too much pressure on the horse, he'll nap or he'll stand up. And you think that from a rider athlete perspective, I think it's very easy for people to get into the habit of blaming themselves, I think, sometime, or thinking the stage the horse is at in development, and they have lots of excuses along the way, versus questioning, could there be a reason these things are there, or could there be a reason this horse is progressing slowly, versus it just being about age or maturity or anything like that. So I like to think, going back to what I said about, yes, the saddler came and the saddle's slipping, and the physio says he's tight in the back. Well, the farrier said the shoe was a bit underrun on that side, and you're kind of fighting little fires. You think, is that 5 little problems? Is it one problem with 5 symptoms? And often, if you have these people together in a room talking, they'll start to connect the dots a bit about what is really going on. You know, I often see when you see the trainer speaking and saying to that example about, oh, he struggles to half pass. one way, and then the farrier thinks, oh, well, the shoe was a bit wore on the inside, and actually I've had to keep the leg a bit low to keep him comfortable when I'm shoeing him. If those are all taken in themselves and not fed back, I mean, these could be signs of early osteoarthritis or pain in a hook joint or all kinds of different things that could be going on. But if people look at them in exclusion or in isolation, you may not get to the solution very fast. So I'll start a little bit about farrier because I do tend to ramble on a little bit. So I'll try not to try to get through the material quick enough for you. But if you've got any questions along the way, you can, of course, jump in. But to me, the critical area to start with is with the farrier, and that's building a strong base of support. And I'll quickly just point out a few things on foot balance and foot support, and then show you why this is so important. If you don't have the base of support right with the horse, it's going to change the mechanics of the limb all the way up through. So it's going to put more stress on your soft tissues, on your joints, and any small issues that might be present from a veterinary standpoint will have more strain and wear on them, or you are also increasing your risk for injury in the future if those areas are not impacted at the moment, but you may be slowly working towards there becoming a problem over time. And to highlight that, like just from a foot balance perspective, is what I want to start with as a key principle. For every 1 centimeter that you're out of balance, or for that horse, is the equivalent of an extra 50 kgs of weight coming, that horse is carrying. So it's a pretty significant impact that you're having on all the structures. So this is a very nice illustration about what we look for with foot balance. And in simple terms, we want to look at the foot. When the shoe is off, we can judge what the widest part of the foot is, and that should be the middle of the foot. And then from that perspective, if we look at a foot, we can say to where the heel is trimmed to the frogs and to the toe, we should have about 50-50 each side of that. So that gives us a nicely balanced foot as a general rule. And if you look at a lot of feet, we have a tendency that I would say far more end up with a bit more in front of that part of the foot than behind that part of the foot. And there's lots of reasons for why that may be. And a lot of it can boil down to you can only judge what is going on with the bones underneath as a best guess. And so your farrier is often working at a best guess from how it looks from the outside. We can't always see what's going on. Sometimes it can be client driven a little bit, that the client's a bit worried if that shoe is too far back or that the bars are sticking out past the heels a little bit, that the horse is going to pull a shoe. And that really shouldn't be the case. If a horse is, you may lose some shoes, but if it's pulling excessively or interfering in some way, that's probably more of a sign that the balance isn't correct or the horse is not moving correctly, rather than it being just that the farrier had the shoe set too far back. Now, these, as a general rule, will need to be looked at as each foot individually, and then what it's doing specifically for that horse's job. But I'm going to click on through as a couple good examples of sort of a before and after of a horse. This is a horse competing at a good level. And this is the front feet of this horse. And we can see straight away on here, if we look at the picture on the left, the shoe is sitting quite a ways up under the heel of that horse. And although that, I'm sure there's a lot of people's horses out there that will look like this. And it looks like the hoof pastern axis, the angle down through the pasture and through the hoof capsule looks fine. But when we look at the balance compared to the previous X-ray, the previous image, we know if we pick that foot up, we're going to have 2/3 of the shoe in front of the widest part of the foot and 1/3 probably behind. So this on the right is kind of 5 weeks later, 4 weeks later, it's been reshod, and we've kind of changed things quite dramatically in one shoeing. I mean, this isn't our final destination, but it's a good start on the road we need to be. So same horse, you can see these are the hinds, not too bad, but again, not enough support under that heel in the first image, and we've put those shoes back and out a bit further to give a much wider base of support for this horse, and setting it on the right path here again. So now it's got a nice stable base of support to move forward. Of interest, this horse did have some minor orthopedic issues that it was being helped with through the competition season. Those were able to diminish in need once this base of support was much better, and it actually had a PB the next test it did after this as well. So what can aid in getting that balance right is foot balance radiographs. So as quite an extreme example, what we're looking at here is a front foot that we've got some plantar imbalance. So if we can see along the bottom of this pedal bone, it is dipping down lower at the back and creating more pressure around the coffin joint. So we want to change our balance here, raise this heel slightly, support that more, and trim the toe down a bit more, the depth of the sole there down a bit more, so we can put that pedal bone in a better position. What we also look at from these is the rotational axis of our joint. So if we had this shoe from behind, what that midline corresponds with is the coffin joint. So you'll be the center of that coffin joint and where your rotational axis is around that. So by setting those shoe back further, or having a larger shoe set back a bit further, getting it in the middle of that rotational axis will relieve pressure on the joint, going to make take less pressure on the joint, less inflammation in the joint, and it's going to relieve some pressure on the tendons as well. As the angle around the back of that navicular, which is the small little kind of bone, the smaller bone you see sitting at the back of that image, those naviculars, the more angle that's around that, the more likely you're going to have rubbing on the deep digital flexor tendon as it comes around to attach on the bottom of the foot here, and more likely you're going to have a tear injury in that. So again, we're reducing our risk of injury as well and looking after longevity, which is very important. So that's great if we look at the foot again all by itself, but unless we communicate back about from the training perspective and from the farrier and from the veterinary perspective of that's great for that foot to be well balanced, how does that impact the rest of the limb? And so we need to look at the horse's conformation to see that we've got the base of support under the limb, not just under the foot, and other tweaks may be needed to be made, or consider what that horse is doing, what surface it's working on, what job it's doing, and what other known problems or what it's finding difficult in the work. And then from that base point, we can start to make little tweaks around our program to help support the rest of the limb up the leg better. So don't forget to look at the bigger picture. So that's from a...
I'll just ask you a question, Robert.
Yes.
So how do you go about choosing which horses to take foot x-rays of? Is there anything you're looking for that makes you think, oh, this one is probably better off having x-rays taken than another, or, you know, and then how quickly you kind of looking to correct things? Would it be over multiple shoeings?
Yeah. So, yes, you will. I'll just come on to talk to you for a minute there. Yeah, so on that, from a which horses do we use it on? So if we look at from a proactive approach, this is the sort of thing that can be a good thing to incorporate as the beginning of your season, when you have an MOT on a horse done and you trot the horse up and flex it and check its heart and do all those kind of things at the beginning of a season to start you off on the right foot. Can be good just to do some foot balance x-rays, front and hind at that time, just to benchmark again where you're at, set you on the right path. Particularly if we think there's been any weaknesses with the horse or any soft tissue injuries or anything that we know we need to be extra careful about or protect against, just having a double check and saying where are we at can be of real value for a lot of horses. And doing that regularly, then hopefully we're just going to have minor changes to make here and there. Sometimes you'll get to a situation where you look at a horse and you think, yes, this has slowly crept out of control. Or you're starting with a new horse that you are worried, well, I've just taken this horse on as a new owner. And yes, I'm really worried about the condition of the feet. It's a good place to start right there as a point A. And what do we need to do going forward? And you would need to make adjustments a little bit over time. Sometimes going too slow with your adjustments is not a good idea in some ways. And I do hear this a lot. People say, oh, we got to make the adjustments very slowly. That can be true if there's only so much you can do at one time, but sometimes making a big correction is going to dramatically reduce your risk of injury if you have a horse that's on that cusp where balance is so out of whack, we're just really overloading a lot of structures that actually making a drastic change is warranted.
Great, thank you.
So I'll go back to. So we've got our base of support. We also then need to make sure we don't have any underlying issues or orthopedic issues as a good start. That's going to affect that horse's, how that horse is going to want to move or how it's going to use itself. And particularly, again, if we go back to the example of getting a new horse and starting from scratch, pre-purchase exam, we've got x-rays, and even if the x-rays are all perfectly normal, it's a good baseline to compare to down the road if things start going wrong. Or we may find things like in this horse in the image on the left, we've got an OCD fragment in the hock. May not be significant for that horse. It may not be causing a problem at this moment, but we need to know about it being there. Same with the arthritis. We got some arthritis starting, or osteoarthritis around the hock joints on the image on the right. And that's, likely going to be causing some pain. This is quite some severe OA there, but even if we have very mild, very early changes that may not be clinically significant yet, we perhaps need to know about them. So we don't have a lame horse, but it may be still impacting how that horse is using itself. And it may be that we have a weakness that if we don't then support a horse like that with a really good base of support, and the hock is turning out as the horse is walking or trotting, that's putting more pressure on these areas, and the likelihood of it becoming a problem is exacerbated, or how soon it's going to become a problem may shorten because we haven't done everything we can to support it in the meantime. And part of the other thing that goes into this is not just about pathology or things wrong with the horse, such as these two examples. It can be about conformational weaknesses too. So it's really important that you look at your horse with honest eyes and say, yes, that forelimb, the knee is a bit offset, and that as a result has the front foot turned out slightly. What do we need to do to help reduce the impact that's having on the leg with the shoeing, with the maintenance of this horse? He's a bit out behind in his hocks. He's a bit sickle hocked. What do we need to do to help support that, to keep the leg going well? So I'll just jump in there too, because I had somebody that asked about on that subject about if you're starting from scratch with vetting, so about what to do for x-rays. So it can be a real how long's a piece of string with x-rays. I mean, in an ideal world, the more information you can have about a horse, the better. So you can x-ray everything from front feet, hind feet, hocks, all his fetlocks, back, neck, spine, skull. I mean, the more information is always a great thing. But unfortunately, that's not necessarily always an option for people. Oops, sorry, I'll jump back there. And so sometimes you need to prioritize about what are key areas that we are going to look for, and having a discussion with your vet at the pre-purchase about what is the horse going to be used for, what has it done previously, what are the likelihood of problems in certain areas. I mean, and on the other side of that, thinking about is the, as part of not just about what the horse's job is going to be, but is this for a horse for me to keep forever and ever more? Or at some stage, am I going to want to sell this horse? And even then we might kind of change our criteria and be a bit fussier on how many x-rays and how perfect they need to be. I hope that gives a bit of help to that question. But I think an individual basis and a chat with your vet, I often would do a lot of hock stifles. Back is a tricky one, because I think that a lot of back issues you might spot on an x-ray are not necessarily clinically significant. But if it was for resale, or you wanted to get a lot, improve the value significantly on it, then it can be something worth considering and looking at. But a lot of the information you get from x-rays, you need to bear with a bit of grain of salt and obviously compare it to the clinical picture. I get sent a lot of x-rays from people looking at purchasing horses, particularly abroad. And before I would go abroad to look at the horse itself, you always want to be sure you've got nothing too worrying on radiographs. But if you see small things, then you would need to relate that back to how the horse looks clinically or in the flesh, and decide whether that's important or not important. So, sorry, also from a veterinary aspect and the mechanics on how everything is going to work, we want to think about, go back again. We want to think about what previous injuries potentially this horse has had. Does it have any soft tissue? Has it had any soft tissue injuries, ligament or tendon or otherwise, that we need to help support as best we can through the work it's doing, which we get into a bit of physio support there as well. And again, through the farrier, providing a base support, making sure all the mechanics are working correctly or as efficiently as we can get them working. And that takes a lot of cooperation, particularly between vet and farrier, and then into more physio later. Not everything is a joint or mechanical issue, though, when we come down into these things. And I suppose sometimes it can be the typical thing when you've got as they say, you've got a hammer, everything you see is a nail. And it's very easy to get into that train of thought sometimes. And although I may carry a hammer and want to think everything's a nail or everything's an orthopedic issue that we can work on as a mechanical issue, there's obviously lots of medical things going on as well. Very lucky in our clinic, we've got lots of other people who are great with these things. And so again, the team approach not only just necessarily applies to vet and trainer and farrier and physio, but working for me within my team of vets that I work with now, because everybody's got their different strengths in different areas. And certainly I call upon, others in our practice when I need help with some of these other medical things, or what's the best way to do, best way to treat and best way to proceed. Strong believer I can't be good at everything, right? Nobody can be perfect at everything. Everyone's got their strong points, and let's work together and make use of them. So these are some good examples of some horses with some varying degree of ulceration. And, every horse is a bit different, and some horses that are very sensitive and are having a significant problem does not necessarily mean that on a scope it looks horrific. You can have some with small ulcerations like this, and it can certainly be causing a lot of discomfort for that particular horse. So we, again, look at the bigger picture on all these, but, gastric ulcers is certainly an area of common area of concern, especially for performance horses. We can have other subclinical issues, particularly respiratory subclinical issues. And by subclinical issues, I mean, we might have some inflammation or allergy or little problems going on where it's not causing disease or pain or anything with the horse, but we're limiting our maximum potential out of that animal. And particularly in these, small dental issues, they can lead to discomfort in ways that can really impact a horse's work or its willingness to work and all kinds of things. So again, working with, we have dental specialists that come in every month and help with cases like these. So yeah, make use of all the different people you can really when you're working through all these problems. And some of these, they may just require some changes in management, changes in routine. And again, I'll mention again with gastric ulcers, I find it, for me, with traveling horses a lot, I think that you may have a horse at home, and I'm sure some medicine people will tell me this is maybe not a good idea or it's not the right thing. But for me, in my experience, that you have horses, you have them at home and you want to be sure everything's right. So you have them scoped, and actually they don't look too bad or not much to see. But that's not necessarily meaning that those horses, once you've traveled, and when you're traveling away to some competitions or with these ones that I do with teams and things, we may be traveling 3 days to get to a competition, and then you're a week away and then 3 days back. And actually what stress that puts on a horse, that might, is it likely at that stage that horse could have ulcers that didn't when you checked him at home and everything was hunky-dory? I do see a lot going where people say, yes, it's always a bit fussy eating when it's away from home. It's always, gets a little bit lacking energy towards when we're away at a show or a clinic on the third day. And to me, I think this is an area that I would be thinking about with those horses. Well, actually, can we just say it's a given that the horse is getting fussy, it's just that horse, or is there things that we can be doing about this? Sorry,
just had a quick question, Rob, about how best to treat ulcers. So of course that's quite a big topic, which could take a long time to discuss, but do you have a quick summary of
yeah, you're right. That's sorry, I'll just come back to you here now. That's a whole subject, a whole presentation in itself beyond gastric ulcers, and we'll have to have people sign back in for that. But so it depends a little bit, as a quick response, I suppose it depends a little bit on the location and severity and what you're doing with the horse at the time. For me, for a lot of horses like these that will be traveling, the ones that I described, traveling longer distances or being away from home, even if they're in the UK, I hear a lot of people that their horses, they're just fussy traveling, even if it's to go be with their trainer for a day or two or at a clinic for a day or two. And I do find a lot of those can respond really nicely to a bit of omeprazole, even if it's at a quarter or half dose as a preventative given well before feed. And I have loads that, they say when they do that, the horse eats fine, it travels well, it comes back well recovered, versus kind of even being away a couple of days. So having chats with your vet about those things or strategies for the particular situation is well worth doing.
Great.
So, sorry, I try to go back to my, great. So, I mean, I put some supplements on here, but when we're talking about how we manage orthopedic issues, again, that's a whole another evening's presentation, I think. I think the take-home message for me is that you've done what you can to make sure that horse is comfortable and treated it appropriately, whether that means intra-articular medications, whether that means, support through supplementation or other systemic medications, whether that's, from a very more basic thing, whether that's anti-inflammatory such as bute or anything like that, to just keep them happy, keep them comfortable so they can work properly. Systemic, whether it's biphosphonates like Children or Osphos, Adequan, Carchfen, any of these other things that we might do as joint support, joint therapy, systemic medications, all whatever we need to do to make sure we keep the horse comfortable so it can work in a proper fashion. So by keeping the horse comfortable and allowing it to work in a correct manner and the mechanics working correctly, then we can start to build the muscle and strength in an appropriate fashion, build the muscle development on top. And again, strength, stability, all of this is going to lead to the horse being able to perform at its optimum, be able to move up through the scales of training and progression through its sport, whatever that might be. And also a key is kind of always regularly assessing and benchmarking where you're at, thinking about what else can we do, what more can we support this horse with. So I'll quickly move on from that into how else we might support this horse. Oh, I will say this as well. So it's quite important, I think, as well, for just your average, your horses, whether you're traveling away, whatever level you're at, thinking about how you manage that horse, aside from you've got all these other steps in place. If your routine is not appropriate for that stage of training, for the horse's ability, for all these things we need to consider, what's the horse doing now? What can it do, or what can it do better? So bearing in mind the historic problems maybe that horse has had that's limiting, building your routine to look after that horse on a day-to-day basis as best you can. And warm-up routine is certainly top of that list for me. Warm-up, cool-down routine, looking after those, it'll have a massive impact on how that horse comes out the next day as well, if you've warmed up, cooled down properly. For any issues you have, even as a preventative, if you're trying to care for tendons, ligaments, things like that, your icing program or what you do to manage those after work. And when it comes to that sort of program, I tell people you need to think about kind of what the horse has done in compared to its level of fitness or what it's been doing previously. Has it done more today than normal? Is it exerted a lot today? Do I need this to look great tomorrow? Has there been any problems in the past? And I need to kind of take some extra care to prevent there being a problem again. Certainly from an icing standpoint, ice water, I've had this question before we came on, and ice water is certainly going to give you the most cooling effect, much more than just ice or gels and things which are not necessarily going to have a huge cooling impact on their own. But ice water, eventually you've got to find something that works for you and your routine. For me, I'd like to ice as much of the limb and as much of the tendon as possible, not just around the cannon, which I think a lot of people do. We want to get up over the joints, whether it's hock, knee, or fetlocks, and get the whole suspensory apparatus as much as we can, if we're really going to look after those tendons and ligaments post-work. So I think I might have another question there. I'm just trying to see. So next, to kind of also thinking about our therapists, our home therapists we're going to use to help us support now the muscle development and that strength and all of that things as we're coming on, as we're building the work. So where do we find somebody? So there's a ramp register, which ramp register is the, if I script ahead, it's a register of animal musculoskeletal practitioners. And that's a really good resource to look on for people. And this will include like chartered physios, veterinary physios, chiropractors, osteopaths. So, and this, the advantage of, well, or as a good starting block is people, because I get this a lot of, where do you find, you know, people that can do this or help support me? So with the RAMP register, these professionals they have liability insurance and professional indemnity insurance. They're held to a standard of professional development and an agreed standard of practices. So they're a really good resource to start. Not to say there's lots of other kind of therapists as well that are all very, very good. Many different massage therapists on and on of all different types and soft tissue manipulation things. And those can all be really good. I think in some cases you can benefit from having two types of therapists and working together. But the key again there is that they're sharing information between, because they kind of can work on different things. So a lot of the massage therapists, you can help more with muscle tone, range of movement, circulation, which the others can do as well, but they can perhaps help the RAMP registers can sometimes help build more targeted plans based on the horse's individual needs as well. And then have soft tissue therapists that can help support in the intervals in between. I often have people say, or when I question people on who their physio or who their therapist is, and they'll tell me somebody amazing, and I'll say that's great, and they say they have them regularly. And I've learned more recently you need to delve into what people consider as regular, because I have had the answer where once every year or twice every year, and yes, that they may do that regularly every 6 months, but perhaps that's not sufficient input for most horses. And to me, regular would be probably 6 to 12 weeks for most horses, if we really want to have an impact and monitor what's going on. Again, one of the big things that I really am taking away and finding so important in maintaining the whole strength and stability through a horse and preventing injury risk is the body posture, core strength of a horse, and the benefits that can be made if you really work on these areas. And there's probably the vast majority of horses out there, as probably the vast majority of us as well. I won't is an area that we probably all suffer from, particularly, riders and stuff as well. We, core strength, we know how important that is for us, and it's so important for your horse as well. Just to allow them to move correctly, not put undue stresses on certain areas of the body. But again, we need this information and having it shared back through. So, you should have your therapist, whoever you're using, speaking to your vets before they attend and treat any horses. Find out what particular is being worked on. Are there any areas of orthopedic concern or veterinary concern that special care must be taken? Very important as well. The trainer or the rider needs to be involved in saying, this is what we're finding hard. This is the areas that we're working on. And yes, you may find that some soft tissue tenderness or tightness is going to come in while you're working through or changing the type of work or how you're working your horse to build enough muscle in certain areas, particularly going back to having a new horse for you. That sometimes you need to kind of change completely how they're being worked and used. So on this train of thought, I find the key thing is the monitoring the progress, that everyone's on the same page, and that if you start to see findings that are coming back again and again, that there's probably an underlying reason for that, and not just accept that, well, yeah, he needs a massage every 6 weeks because he gets really tight in his back, or, sore in his shoulders or whatever, that might be base of his neck or poll. If these areas are continually coming back and the same findings, that's not just that horse. There's probably some underlying issue there, and delving a bit deeper and getting people communicating is really key. Continually challenge yourself. That's the take home on that one. So this I've kind of gone through already, promoting exercise. So there's so much that can be done in building exercises into your program, whether it's on their back, whether it's incorporating things like water treadmill, whether it's incorporating groundwork, and sometimes the complicated things don't necessarily make things better. So looking at even just pole work, when you look at walk poles versus trot poles, walk poles are better for building strength. It sounds like you think it's maybe somebody might look at it as a basic thing to do, or something that my horse is too advanced for. But actually, when you have to walk over something, the horse has to use a lot of strength and stability, which will aid you in many areas, versus when you're trotting over, that you're just using the recoil in the tendon, the energy loads as the tendon loads and springs you over. It's not really doing as much for strength and stability, but it's working in other areas like fitness and coordination and activity. So that everything has its sort of, they all have their area of benefit. So I've had somebody, and this is a great question, thinking about experience about regular assessment and having people together, as often as you can, I suppose, is the answer about how you can, getting the whole team together. I know that's often very hard to do, but certainly, even if it's at the beginning of a year or beginning and partway through a year, you have that opportunity, or at some stage, it might just be the vet and physio together, or it might be the vet and farrier together, or any combination of. But the key thing is creating the communication from all aspects. That's key. And it's about then preempting there being a problem as much as anything. And we certainly see many times the benefit of working to avoid an injury, because sometimes a small change early on might mean a few easy weeks versus having an injury and out for 6 months. So I find, and the more I've learned this through not only just having my own horse, but when I travel with the teams, by watching riders ride, and you really start to get a picture of what a horse finds difficult and what it finds easy. And you can pick out so many things there, and we can see clinically capable horses that are perfectly sound or are working at a very high level, but that doesn't mean they don't find some things harder than others, or some things not equal one way or another, one rein or another. And those can indicate those early signs you're starting to see of small things creeping in. And by preempting early or delving into those early, we get the more out of the horse in the first place, which is really the big goal. We want higher marks and better scores on the doors, more endurance when they're in a cross-country phase of an event, or all of these things that we want them at their best for, or working towards getting better. So I find observing horses ridden changes things so much. And it goes to things even that you wouldn't necessarily think are a problem when you see them on the ground. And a good example I've had just recently is a shoe that looks perfect on the horse. You trot up and down. When you trot it on the soft, or on the surface, obviously it's on a different surface. The body's using itself in a different way. And we saw a whole different image in the dynamic movement. And there were some pretty obvious changes that we needed to make from a shoeing standpoint, because this horse was getting pain higher up and kind of frustrating why it was coming back, when we had some other things that perhaps we could change to support this. So it's kind of thinking a little bit outside the box and looking at different areas at different times. And I find a lot of riders, as you delve into that, they know their horse, they know when something's not right. But as I said earlier, so many times they think it's them or the training or the stage that they're at. So, and a lot of riders, you can see them when you really start watching, especially when you're watching the same riders again and again, that you get a pattern for the number of times that a rider will correct things instinctively, and just that's how they're training and that's how they're working. And you can start to pick that up when you're watching. You can say the horse may look beautiful, and you say you were constantly at that right hind to say, yes, pick up the right hind, pick up the right hind. And you can see those riders doing those things. Or you can notice, yes, you were starting to have to kind of compensate in the way you were bending through that travers, or you know what you were doing. You can see the riders start to compensate for these things, and when you start to question them and pick them apart, you get to the underlying reason for that. And it's something that riders often are doing without thinking of, rather than looking at it as being a problem. So once you start delving into that, or riders are aware that actually all these things that they do, mention it to your vet, mention it to your trainer, your farrier, your physio, and start putting the pieces of the puzzle together. It may be they can't help, but it's always worth a conversation. These conversations are always worth being had, even just picking up the phone and saying, this is what I felt, or sending a video. So I'll just go quickly, just to kind of wrap things up a bit there, because I realize I'm holding you all on a long time here.
There's just one quick question, Rob. Sorry to interrupt. Before you start on equipment, it's a bit relevant to what you're about to talk about. It was just going back to what you mentioned about poles for building strength, and whether use of any kind of aids, such as an Aqua Band, could be beneficial alongside.
100%. So it's all about what's individual for that horse. So you need to play around with things a bit. But certainly Aqua Bands, when you're doing a lot of hand work or pole exercises and things, this is where a lot of training aids really come in useful. And you may be a German training aid like a bungee, the Aqua Band, they are excellent for causing some core engagement and getting the pick up. Sometimes a combination of the two. So you might need something to have that horse coming in and engaging and lifting through its core, and the Aqua Bands there just as a reminder to make it lift. And then you'll get much more out of those exercises, much more out of the walk poles, doing them slow and steady, methodical. Some in-hand exercises you can do where you have them weight transferring and moving around your body. All these things done in a controlled, stable way with the core engaged will yield the most you can get out of it. But it all comes down to, I'll just come back to you a moment here. So a lot of that, it all comes down to the individual horse. So sometimes what works really good for one horse is not going to work on the other. And I've seen some horses where you put the Aqua Core on and they just don't care and they lay on it and it's not affecting them. So there's other strategies you may have to try, or whether it's, some may just need the belly band, some may need the band behind the bum as well to make them engage. And so it's about observing how that horse is moving to optimize the effect you're having. And that's really important too with water treadmill, for example, or dry treadmill or whatever it is about observing how that horse is moving to get the most out of it. And if the horse is not moving correctly, then we need to change what we're doing, because we'll then be creating problems rather than solving problems. So that might do with, if it is water treadmill, say, with water depth. If it's a dry treadmill, it may do with speed. Well, in both cases, it could do with speed. Or in some cases, like with the dry treadmill, what training aids we're using conjunction with to make sure that the horse is moving in the way we want to build the muscles we want to. Hope that makes some sense. So very targeted and individual as the no straight answers. There's a whole nother night's talk on just that, I'm sure, as well there. So, so then again, this is a massive issue as well. So equipment, And I will promise I'll get through this quite quickly too. So again, this goes back to thinking about saddle fit. And yes, my saddle slips, my saddle slips, my saddle slips. Well, if you have recurrent things that these are happening, there could be a few reasons why a saddle's moving. It can be you as the rider, that you're asymmetric and you're pulling it one way. It can be the saddle, that it's not providing a level platform for you, or it could be what's underneath the horse. Or it could be the interaction of all three together. Often we can see, and I start to see this in horses as well, the more, especially this time of year when the coach clipped and you see rubs and stuff starting to see a rub more one side than another, or in one area than another, probably a good indication that saddle might be moving or not sitting where it should. And then I start to watch very closely about how that soft tissues feel when you palpate over the horse, and then how that horse is moving, and whether there's a subtle issue with how the horse is mechanically working that is causing that saddle to go a certain way. And we certainly see strong relationships there. So don't think, yes, I have the saddler and the saddle always goes right, just always goes right. That's fine. If that's recurring and it's not being resolved with the check and the fit, then dig deeper. Again, with saddle check, I have this where, again, this comes into how regular is regular. So I would think certainly probably every 3 to 4 months you should be having your saddles checked, because horses do not stay the same shape and you're not doing the same work throughout the year. I recently had someone tell me that their saddle, the horse's muscles have molded to the saddle now, so they don't need to change it anymore. And that scared me slightly. But it just, obviously you're not working to get the most there, and probably you're creating some problems. It's important to remember it's not just about regular checks, it's also thinking about timing when these checks occur. So if your horse has changed shape, if it's changed work, then perhaps you may need to adjust these timings and shorten them around events such as that. Generally, and I try my best to always remember to tell people this, but if the horse has had some veterinary interventions, or it's had some hawk medications or stretch medications or whatever it may be, I'll try to say, check your saddle in 6 weeks, because that's going to change how the horse is moving and how it's using itself. And so likely the saddle needs then adjusting how it's sitting, because it's going to change what's going on there as well. So where to look for help with this sort of thing? Well, as a good starting point, Society of Master Saddlers. There's obviously saddle makers and saddle fitters, which are two different things. And some people that hold both qualifications. On that website, they have a website you can go on and find people in your area. And they're also really good if you just phone them up sometimes and say, this is what I need, this is my situation, and they can often try to help point you in the right direction. So take homes, communicate what you feel. So athlete, rider, you're driving your home team. It's your responsibility, it's your journey, for whether it's the Pony Club Championships, Riding Club Championships, Nationals, Olympics, whatever your goal is. You need to be pushing these forward, and you need to communicate what you're feeling as a rider on this horse, what's going on under you. Even if you think it's not, if you think it's you or stage of development, it's worth a conversation. Promote communication and sharing of information amongst your home team. And that is everybody. I put saddler, but I mean, that's everybody else that you're working with there as well. Nutritionists, whoever it might be. Have people, the more people work together, the more you'll start to join up these little areas, and light bulbs start going off and things start to click and fall into place. The cliche, but the harder you work for these sort of things, the luckier people seem to get. So it's not just about luck, it's about all this in hard work that goes into it. Constantly benchmarking where you're at, monitoring and challenging yourself. So, having a fantastic therapist or a fantastic vet is great if they're there for you when you need them in an emergency, but it's even better if you have them kind of evaluating as you're going along through the season and through the competition year about where you're at and how things are looking now, because we all know all that changes as the year goes on. And that's everything. So half an hour balled up into just over an hour. So
just going back to one of the questions, Rob, that was asked earlier, which kind of was looking into, say, for example, the use of the team, so the farrier, the vet, the therapist, etc. Can that help to minimize potentially the need for more invasive treatments in the future, such as hock medications or back medications or things like that? Or is it all part and parcel of the whole overall picture?
Yeah, so yeah, you can definitely reduce need for things. And I find a lot of times where I thought, well, yes, you've got orthopedic issues, say, as I'll use as an example, that perhaps a horse needs its stifles medicating. And then, so you've medicated them, you think, well, it needs medicating every 6 months because that's how long things might last. I'll just come back to you here now. But I find the more you start to incorporate all of these bits together, so we know it's had some stifle pain, there's maybe some things we can do with the shoeing because it's moving its leg out a little bit when it travels. We can stabilize that platform a bit more, stabilize how that leg is flexing and using itself. Then that allows us then to build in more strength with this horse, so we can work on some exercises, even if it's stable exercises, like going to the stifle example of tail pulls, building muscle around that, building the core strength in so they're not overloading as much as they would. And then you'll find over the long term that you may need to intervene less and less as other areas. And if you're sure that perhaps there's no other areas of pain that are causing it to compensate and overload certain areas, you start to pick away all these little bits, you'll find it gets, the long term for that horse gets better and better.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, that makes sense. And then there's just one more question, kind of touches on the surfaces to train your horse on based on if you have soft tissue versus joint kind of or bony pathology going on. I suppose if you have soft tissue injury, you're better off training on softer or harder ground, that sort of thing. And how much kind of emphasis would you put on the importance of that?
Yeah. So obviously, in an ideal world, it's always best to work on the best surfaces you can. So, and I think if you've had a serious problem or there is a serious injury, again, you've got to look at the cases quite individually. So if we think about a horse that's had a soft tissue injury, then we do want to be probably careful about what going or what ground we're going to be working it on, depending on the need for that horse. I think if we look at slightly broader, if I step away from injury to start with, then certainly cross training on different types of surfaces and stuff is really beneficial, and that we can build in strength and stability in different areas. So, and I was told once, this is an analogy which I think is a great one, that if you always trained every day on the track, but then you had to run a race at the beach, you'd suffer. But if you trained every day at the beach and had to run on the track, you'd be flying. So maybe we don't want to go that extreme with our horses, but not always having a perfect surface at home or what we train on can perhaps then help us sometimes when you go out competing. And I think in the UK, as probably a lot of Europe, we're very spoiled, a lot of us, that we've got excellent surfaces at home. And then sometimes when you go away to competitions, the surface is not as good as it is at home. And yes, your horse might struggle a bit more, particularly with soft tissue injuries, because often they'll have it too deep or too holding or something like that when you're away at a competition. If you look at eventers, if you think if you're doing all your dressage schooling on a surface and then when you go out competing you're on grass, your horse is going to find that a bit more difficult. So yeah, that cross training as a whole is and on different surfaces is certainly beneficial, but you do have to look at every horse individually. So some you might need to be a bit more careful with than others.
Perfect. Thank you.
Great.
Well, I think that's all the questions we've had so far. But if there are any more questions, then feel free to drop us an email or get in touch with us on social media or anything like that. Thank you all very much for attending. I'm sure you'll find it very interesting. We do have another webinar coming up next month, which will be hosted by another of our vets, Chloe, based on kind of endocrine disease, Cushing's and things like that. And there'll be a link out for that in the next few weeks. Equally, we welcome any feedback you have for us, if we can improve anything for you, as well as if you have any topics you would like to be discussed, then feel free to drop us an email and we shall organise that for you.